Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. You can find out more about our Public Affairs Forum by going to our website at www.austinuu.org. Our forums are free and open to the public and every Sunday at noon. Today, Eric Hartman is going to introduce our speaker on the labor movement. Eric?
Thank you, Bonnie. It's my honor to introduce Ken Zaffiris, the president of Education Austin, as our guest speaker today. I think I should introduce him as the embodiment of a phenomenon that is not supposed to exist, according to many media outlets in Texas and elsewhere. That is a labor movement that provides an effective voice for workers and does so in spite of being in a state like Texas, where nobody makes that easy for us. A labor movement that is actively fighting for folks who are not members of unions, prominently including the students in Austin ISD, where there's a tremendous history of collaboration between parents and teachers, led by folks like Ken Zaffiris, to make sure that the focus is on instruction and learning. There's also the role that is played by the labor movement in Texas in immigration reform. The stereotype that's promoted by some in the media to this day is that somehow labor unions are hostile toward immigrant workers' rights. The exact opposite is the case, and Ken will give you chapter and verse. Ken has been the president of Education Austin now for 3 years, and in that capacity, you may have seen his name cropping up again and again in local newspapers as the spokesperson for employees in education in Austin ISD, as a pioneer in innovation in public education reform. And if you haven't, you have an extra treat in store to be introduced to him for the first time. Ken is a fine teacher, a great union leader, and it's our privilege to hear from him today. Join me in welcoming Ken Zaffiris.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. My name is Ken Zaffiris. I am president of Education Austin, the Teacher and School Employees Union for AISD. But as I tell a lot of people, more importantly, I'm a teacher. I taught for 12 years at Burnett Middle School with great pride and with what I like to think is a relative level of success. Just to give you a little bit of background just on me. I grew up in Iowa, not a big union state, right-to-work state. Didn't have strong unions, stronger than Texas, but it's hard to find a place that's not stronger than Texas. One of 5 children, and my father, before he passed, remember he was reflecting on having 4 boys and a daughter, and 4 troubled boys and a daughter, who gave him a lot of grief, and my mother a lot of grief over the years, but finally learned how to get our heads straight and to do the right things. And he said, Kenneth, you know what I'm proud of? Even though all my sons and my daughter didn't go to college, they're all hard workers. They all know what it is to put a day's work in. And that I'm proud of. And I always remember that. Because it's important to work hard. It's important to be a good worker and to be dedicated to whatever your craft, your trade, your profession happens to be. But what's equally important to being a good worker is to be a good employer, to respect the people that work hard for you, to pay the people that work hard for you, to give them the benefits and the working conditions that every good worker deserves. And so as a union president, which I never in a million years thought I was going to be a union president, I loved teaching and I wanted to teach. I had gone out of retail late in my life and started teaching when I was 33. This simply wasn't a path that I thought I'd be on. But I'm very thankful to be here. Because to understand the side of the worker and the employer is very important. That both are integral in the success of the labor movement. One of the important parts of being a union leader and to be part of a union is, yes, it's respect. We want to make sure that people are respected. the people have dignity. But those are concepts. Those are things that people can say, I do respect you. I do give you dignity. What's important in our movement is that we establish power. And that we not wait for us to receive power or for others to empower us, because those things will never happen. Those with power will never give it to us, because that's taking away from their power. What is important is we go out and take power. That we find the opportunities and we take that power back that once was ours. 40, 50 years ago, the labor movement in the private sector was almost 40%. Almost 40% of the workers in this country were unionized in the private sector. That's enormous. When you look at the fact that today, depending on who you talk to, it's somewhere around 7%. 40, 50 years ago when the labor movement said, we're going to vote and you need to listen to us, politicians and people in power had to listen. Because we turned the people out that made a difference at the ballot box, which made a difference in the workplace, which made a difference in legislation, this whole web of power that we were an integral part of. Fast forward 40, 50 years later, and we do not enjoy that same position. In the private sector, when we're dealing about 7%, and in the public sector, where we're considerably stronger, and the one area that is the strongest area, surprisingly, is teachers' unions. So why is it that they're coming after us? Well, I think it's obvious. We are the strongest in the public sector. And as I've spoken to a lot of people over the last 3 years, I see this really as a two-front war. We not only in the teachers' union have to battle the fact that they are attacking labor on one front. And they want nothing better or nothing more than to dismantle teachers' unions. Because the one thing that is in the way of corporate reform in education, the one last line of defense against schools being charterized, privatized, and overtaken is the teachers' unions. And I firmly believe that. It is important that we stay here, but it is equally important for them to destroy us. So on one side, we have the labor attacks. And you've heard them. You've heard them in labor for years. For years, it was the greedy auto worker. All he or she wants is money. The big fat pension. They don't work. Well, I knew a lot of I knew a lot of UAW workers out in Dayton, Ohio when I lived out there at the Moraine plant. And they were not lazy workers. They built the S10 that I drove. I had a lot of respect for it. But that narrative is an easy narrative for the right. It's easy to demonize us and to make the others in the labor movement outside of unions to feel bad about their place and to be pitted against the union. And the right was very patient. They were very, very strategic, and they waited and whittled away for decades at the labor movement. Through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. As the private sector grew to 40%, the public sector exploded after 1949 and the opportunities for public workers to organize. It was a profound movement in this country that built our middle class to a large extent, that gave people opportunities outside of the unions to have an opportunity. Because as the unions built greater power, those who were not unionized, those entities had to reflect the improved wages and the improved benefits. And even if they weren't at the level that the union was able to ascertain, they had improved and created greater opportunity nationwide. So as the 60s and the 70s moved on, I think we all kind of realized at a moment when Ronald Reagan stood up against the air flight, traffic controllers, and took a hard stand. It wasn't the first. There were hard stands against labor long before Ronald Reagan. But it was the visible moment of this government saying it didn't value labor. And it is at that point things began on a downward trajectory. And we started a battle in the private sector. And in the public sector continued to try to hang on until we are where we are today. So these attacks on the private sector, you'd have to say were quite successful when you look at 40 to 7%. And so if you look at the last 10 years, as No Child Left Behind, increased testing, and the attacks, the strategic attack on public education to let people know that public education is failing, that those teachers are bad teachers, that labor just protects bad teachers who just care about their pocketbook, that just care about their fat pension, that just care about themselves and don't care about their kids and the students in public education. It's the same story they laid out in the private sector. It worked very well. But the fact is that now we know what they did. And we have to stand against it. And they've been trying for the last 15 years to stand and to destroy teachers' unions. As a teacher, 15 years ago, as I entered into this district in 1998, I taught 8th grade language arts at Burnett Middle School. I went in and teachers were saying, I'm getting out of this. I've got no more freedom anymore. I'm tired of this. I'm going to go try something different. And one of them wanted to go try a charter school. They just wanted to try something different. And in those days, charter schools weren't the great evil. 15, 20 years ago, you could go out and try to innovate and do something a little different that might inform what we're doing in public education. I had teachers saying that the test is everything. I didn't know any different. I entered in 1998. The TOS test was in the middle of doing TOS test. I didn't know that it was a problem. And I just started teaching. And I did what I needed to do. And I taught, and I taught, and I taught Shakespeare, and I taught poetry, and I taught all the things that I love as a language arts teacher. As one who's passionate about English and about language and about writing. But our governor at the time, George W. Bush, and his cronies like Sandy Kress had a different vision for public education. They said, we can figure out how to make things better if we just test everybody. And we'll make them accountable. And those people that don't do it, we'll get rid of them. And those districts that don't do it, we'll close them down. And those schools. And so they came up with state accountability. And they developed a tax test. And Sandy Kress and George W. Bush were very happy about their plan and how they'd instituted. And they even claimed a miracle. They claimed a miracle. Hallelujah. In Houston, Texas, as George W. Bush was trying to run for office, for president, they claimed that Houston was a miracle. They turned everything around. As the numbers were a great success, that if you hold teachers accountable and tell them how a kid's doing on a test, that'll tell you how good the kid is, and it'll make the kid do better because the kid will see that number and say, oh, I got to do better. And then they'll just do better. But as we all know today, 15 years later, that approach dismantled, destroyed the very essence of education, of public education, because it was no longer driven by the public. It was driven by those reformists that thought that a test would solve our problems. Reformists that underneath all of their pomp and circumstance about wanting public schools to succeed, they didn't want them to succeed. They wanted those schools to fail. They wanted public education to fail, and they still do, so that they can charterize it, voucherize it, and privatize it. And that's exactly what they want. But we're not going to have it. We're not going to have it. We're going to stand up for public education Because public education is the foundation, I believe, of the democracy in this country. If you do not have an educated electorate, if you do not believe that educating every single child and giving every single child the opportunity to achieve, to be educated, and not just the lucky ones that get into a charter, not just the lucky ones that get a voucher to go to a private school, every single child. Because the kids that don't go into those charter schools, the kids that don't have the money to go to a private school, where do they go? They come back to schools like Burnett Middle School. They come back to the public school because we don't discriminate. We don't pick and choose. We don't exit you because you don't fit our plan. We believe that you need to be part of our plan, period. Whether you're difficult, whether you come out of a hard circumstance, whether you have challenges, we don't care. We want you here. We care about you as a human being. We care about you as a child that needs opportunities. And speaking as a child that was nothing but trouble in high school and did nothing but cause problems, I know the value of an opportunity and of people not giving up on me. They held me accountable as a human being, but they treated me as a human being. They didn't treat me as a number, as a test score, as a commodity. I was a person. And that's what public education is. We value the person, not the number. Excuse me. So what do? When they're coming at us from the labor standpoint to destroy labor, and we're the last line for public education, and on this side, they're attacking the teachers and public education. So they get to take out two in one fell swoop. We get rid of those teachers of public education, those unions of public education all at once. It's huge. But it's a battle that we cannot wage on our own. Teachers' unions, on their own, can't do it. And that's what we've discovered. Any more than the unions, the mighty UAW, IBEW, all the trades, CWA, all of the powerful unions could not solely stop these attacks. So how do you do it? How are you going to fight back? Let me tell you a little story about what we did a couple years ago. 2 years ago, a charter school from the Valley called Idea Charter. They have the audacity to call themselves a public school. Idea Public School Charter. Who came up out of the Valley and made a deal with our district. A deal that we didn't know about, weren't told about, were only informed of in any real depth 7 weeks before it was supposed to run through the school board. 7 weeks to mobilize the community. 7 weeks to talk to people about what this charter school was. And what they were going to do was not go into Eastside Memorial, where there had been decades, years of claims of struggles and economic hardship and educational challenges, which there are. But not to go into that school to make repairs and to make improvements, which a charter is not the answer. They decided to turn an elementary school, Allen Elementary, which was an academically acceptable school in the Eastside feeder pattern, give the elementary school over to them, sacrifice it to Idea charter schools with the intent of building through the feeder pattern all the way up to the high school. So not only would we turn one school over, but an entire feeder pattern. And the charter stated that the district would help Idea look for other opportunities. Other opportunities. Other feeder patterns, other groups of school to turn over to Idea. We stood up against it and said, this is wrong. We found data that Ed Fuller a well-respected researcher out of Penn State University who did research with the district, that the district used his research for years. And we dared to challenge the district's suggestion that IDEA was the answer. We dared to challenge IDEA's numbers and the fact that they treat all kids when we told them that they serve less than 3% of special ed kids. That when questioned on this, their CEO, Tom Torkelson, said that it is not dyslexia, it is dystechia. That the problem with special ed kids was not the kid, it was not genetics, it was not challenges presented in that life, it was the teacher to blame. It was appalling. But we were going to turn a school over to him. We were going to turn a whole feeder pattern and future feeder patterns over someone that had no respect for a child's disability, a teacher's profession, and the neighborhood and the parents that live there. None. So what we did is we began to speak up, and we started to see allies in the community. We started seeing people at public events speaking out. A group that came to be known as Pride of the East Side. A strong and powerful group of East Side teachers, students, and parents that said, no, you can't do this to us. We had Occupy AISD, who had stood firm through the Occupy movement. And out of the Occupy movement was the one stronghold locally that continued to be a strong, visible voice. We began to partner with Texas Civil Rights Project. We began to talk to other organizations because we can't do it alone. And so we started to move together. We started to go to board meetings together. We started to march together. I'll never forget it. A couple years back, when there was a march and there was a standing out against all of the reform, we got a call from a professor at UT, Snehal Singave. Do you want to march with other union brothers and sisters? It's something we hadn't done for a while. We had all isolated ourselves in the trades and in the professional, in the public and private sector. And we all came together. And what we hadn't been able to do as a lone union, we walked downtown with 600 brothers and sisters. It was powerful. When we went to the board meeting to strike down IDEA, to say, no, you can't do this. We had gone 1 week to a board meeting, the week it was going to be decided. And people got there at 5 o'clock in the morning to sign up to speak. We were so powerful. We were in the boardroom, in the lobby, and spilled out into the grounds outside. That they postponed it to the next week. So the next week we knew that they would have their forces there at 5 o'clock. So what do? We organized together. Pride, Education Austin, Occupy AISD, spent the night camped out in AISD, brought tents, blankets, even though it was raining. And they took their spot. They stayed there, over 30 of them to fill the 30 spots. And I walked out in the morning and came down to AISD. And I stepped down and someone handed me a sign that said, I am Ken Zaffiris. And gave me the sign for saving my place in line. It's one of the most powerful moments of my life as a teacher and as a union leader. I am Ken Zaffiris. I am a teacher. I am the union. I am. It was powerful. And that night at that board meeting, when we stood up and it was full in the board meeting and in the lobby and in the courtyard, in the rain, making people stand in the rain for this vote, sadly, we lost the vote that night. But a chant started. And people began to call politicians out in that boardroom. And a chant began, "We will vote you out. We will vote you out. We will vote you out." And it erupted. I've never seen anything like it. And we walked out. And although we were defeated at that moment, we rallied outside afterwards and made a commitment that this was not the end. That this was just another step in stopping this movement. Fast forward 1 year. Not even 1 year. As we start to organize for the board elections in November the following year, we go out and we find 4 quality candidates. We vet them, we endorse them, we support them as a union, but once again, we know we can't do it alone. We reach out to all of our friends, our partners, our brothers and sisters in the Central Labor Council, in neighborhoods, community organizations, the ISO, everybody coming together to stand together and to campaign for these candidates. And of the 4 candidates, this little old public or this little old community organization comprised of unions and neighbors and teachers and parents and kids came together to elect 3 out of 4. We flipped the board from 6-3 against us to 5-4 for us. And the very first order of business that board took upon themselves was to terminate the IDEA contract with this district and kick IDEA out. It was powerful. On the same night of that vote, we were fortunate enough as a union, we had been working with teachers and parents to talk to them about what they wanted for their educational, what were their dreams for their school. And we had a school, Travis Heights Elementary, that was interested in not listening to those above, but listening to their colleagues and the parents. And they came together and they were approved for their own school that was driven by teachers and parents and grassroots organizations to create a school of their own. That couldn't have been more different than IDEA that was forced down people's throats. It was powerful. Along the way, we made friends with organizations like Workers' Defense Project. And this is important. Workers' Defense Project, they're not union. They're defending the workers that don't have the opportunity to unionize. They don't have the place to organize. We're in Texas. Texas, with its right to work state, with its right to work laws, which really are more clearly defined as right to abuse and right to fire and right to destroy and right to disrespect laws. There's not a right to work. It's a right to treat you with the least respect and the lowest dollar they could possibly get away with. And over the last year, we've stood firm with Workers' Defense Project in fighting for a prevailing wage, for fighting for a livable wage, standing at City Council to stand up to make sure that these billion-dollar businesses like Apple and White Lodging pay people what they deserve. Pay a worker with respect and dignity, but not just offer respect and dignity. Show it to them. Give them the money. Pay them. Give them safety. Train them. Give them the opportunity to build in their trades, to grow in their trade. Not just to be a worker to make a couple of dollars so that you can build your high rise and you can make your billions of dollars. This is a community of workers, a community of families. Because the parents of my students are working on many of these projects. The students that want an opportunity to get into a school, to get into college, need to have a family that can have an opportunity to good wages to pay for school. You can give them all your charters, all you want. But that family has to have a job to pay for school because they're cutting back at the federal level on what they're paying for school. School is just getting more expensive. They're not making it cheaper and easier. They're making it more expensive and harder. So the parents have to have a living wage to provide for their kids. So we work with organizations like Workers' Defense Project, the IBEW, and my brother over here, ISO. It's important that we work together. The Workers' Defense Project has done great work, and I think if you've noticed lately, and if you haven't, on NPR, in the New York Times, they've been featured. Powerful work for the people that have the least voice in this community. And we continue to work with Workers' Defense Project, with our brothers and sisters. We have to find opportunities to work together on many different areas. Recently, you may have heard that AISD became the second district in the state of Texas to offer insurance for all families, regardless of your family. And even though the district couldn't bring themselves to say it, were scared to even utter the word for fear of a lawsuit, oh my gosh, we're going to insure gay families. We don't care what the family looks like. You're a family, gay, straight. I don't care. We don't care. Transgender, we don't care. If you are a family, you are a family. You should have the right to affordable health care. You should have a right to go to the doctor, to not have to make a choice. Do I stay home with my child, or do I go get something to eat for my child? No one should have to make those choices. Everybody needs to have health care. And we did this work in collaboration with Equality Texas, the LGBT community, and encourage the district to continue to work with organizations. They're not union. There may be some people that are in their families that are union, but they're not union. But they're our brothers and sisters nonetheless, because we're fighting for a better day, for a better workplace, and a better opportunity for everyone. If we don't look beyond our own circumstances to reach out to our brothers and sisters, no matter who they are, where they are, if someone is struggling, we must be there to lend a helping hand. We must be there to stand up. We must be there to work together, because you don't know when it will be you that needs help. We need to rely on each other. And today I just saw an article from in the New York Times. You may want to check, because within our union over the last 2-3 years, our president, Randy Weingarten of the American Federation of Teachers, has been preaching community, has been preaching reaching out. That's why we're doing this. Richard Trumka of the AFL-CIO, in an article in the New York Times, talks just about this. How do we reach out beyond our typical circles? So that we don't dismantle the union, but that we open our arms up in the union to bring our brothers and sisters from all walks of life, in every profession, in every work, in every trade, to bring them in, knowing that eventually we need to unionize. We need to make demands in the workplace. As you look at Walmart, no, they're not union, but people are being arrested outside of Walmart. They're not union, but there was a flash mob in a Walmart. There are things we can do. Even though they're not union, we need to stand up with those workers. We don't just stand up for union rights. We must stand up for all labor rights. Every worker in this country must be protected, must have opportunities. And that's what our fight must be, is to work together, to come together to fight for all labor in this country, for all parents in this country, for all children in this country. Because at the end of the day, those who had those rights 30, 40, 50 years ago were not doing it for themselves. They did it for their children and the kids that came after them to make a better life for the future. It is important that we never forget that. And that we must owe them and demonstrate our respect for them, for what they fought for and died for us. That we pick up that mantle and we fight in the same way, with the same passion. We have to think differently because labor is different today than 1940. But we must fight and stand up together. It is the only way we will ever succeed as a labor movement. So I want to thank you today for taking the time to come in here, taking the time to spend an hour to listen to this kid from Iowa that's an 8th grade language arts teacher that got lucky enough to get in this position and have great leaders and colleagues like Eric Hartman that help me do this work. Because it's not me. I'm a tiny little speck. It's all of us and everyone we know in our communities. Thank you very much.
I'm sure your talk has inspired a number of questions. Would you raise your hands high and I will bring you the microphone?
My question is, I think we all know that voter turnout and voter registration in Texas are some concerns that a lot of people are wanting to address. I was curious, what is Education Austin doing around increasing not only registration but potentially voter turnout as well? Later this afternoon, I'm hesitantly attending a Battleground Texas meeting, but I look forward to building collaboration around some straightforward things such as just registering and getting out the vote.
Well, thank you, Mark. And it's really important. I don't think that we can underscore how important it is to get the vote out. In our current system, we must do that. And the right and the Tea Party was very effective in doing that. There are other things we need to do, and we don't need to emulate them. I don't want to. But what we need to do is to find that power and to get people, one, registered. And we must dig into pockets that have not traditionally been represented. In the youth vote, in neighborhoods with low socioeconomic minority populations, we must make sure, as we have a tax on voting rights and dismantling of the Voting Rights Act, we must double down on our efforts to make it as easy and as accessible as possible. So getting deputized, getting out and registering, but then connecting with a larger organization that does the block walk or can a large get out the vote push is very important. So what you're doing is fundamentally the right direction. We just have to begin to link with others so that we're moving in a large, we have a mass that's getting the turnout. We will be deputizing voters. We do deputize some of our members. We try to make any campus that is interested in having having someone come out to deputize. We'll work to see that happen. If we get enough interest, we'll make it a localized area, maybe in North Austin, where we could bring teachers and maybe talk about some of the efforts we need to go through to get the vote out.
Thank you very much. About 15 years ago, I was actually involved in this move to try to quantify the teaching. And I had concerns about exactly what happened and expressed those and was told they weren't problems, and they turned out to be those. I'm concerned also because I think the reason that we don't have an appreciation of the labor unions and what's happened is because we don't teach the history. We don't have a people's history of the United States that explain that. I think those sorts of pieces of information have been omitted from our school systems, and consequently people don't understand the value of the labor movement. I have a specific question about the AISD at this time.
Sure.
There have been recent reports on the Ann Richards School regarding significant problems with relations with some very motivated teachers out there and with effectively cherry-picking what was supposed to be a more broad spectrum student population. What can you contribute to our understanding of this situation?
Well, I think that the Chronicle article really spells out the problem. It's not exclusive to Ann Richards, because this is what we see in charters, in magnets. And in magnet, at least it's up front, right? It's up front. This is what we're doing. You're going to apply, and we're going to select. It's a little different, and you can have some people spin this. What's important is that when you look at a school, we believe that if you're going to be a public school, that you have to provide opportunities for everybody. And if you're going to represent yourself as an alternative, as Ann Richards has, the Ann Richards School, that doesn't cherry pick, that doesn't skim and trim, then you need to be able to show that you don't do that. It's obvious through the data and through that article and through much of what many suspected that that's exactly what's happening. And that's unacceptable. If it is not an inviting environment, except for a handful that are succeeding within the program, that's unacceptable when you characterize yourself as a great school for all kids. And one of the problems I have with this is that we tend to take advantage of minority labels. I even hate that term. When you're saying that we have African American and Latinas coming into our school, and we suggest that we're helping everybody because we're helping African American and Latinas, that supposes that they're not performing well. And that gives the suggestion that it's a group of people, a very broad generalization, that they don't perform well. Well, that's just a crock. Because you don't perform well is not predicated on the color of your skin. But charters and others will take advantage of that. IDEA did. When you have kids coming into your program, performing at a higher level, they're going to perform in your program at a higher level and make you look good. It just follows. It doesn't matter who you are. The kids going into Ann Richards and to many charter schools perform at a higher level. And then they want to compare themselves to other schools. Gee, why couldn't we get to that level? We're helping all those poor African American and Latina kids. Bull. You're giving those kids an opportunity to do something, sure. But don't take claim for excellence that came to your school already, that already entered in to begin with. That was the child's excellence. And that's where I have a real problem with chartering and with these schools that claim to do so much for at-risk population, that they characterize those at-risk population as being less. And I can't accept that. If you create a two-tiered system, if you're saying a certain group of kids are going to get it through our system and succeed, a certain group for whatever, it could be grades, could be performance, could be behavior, could be just we don't like what you do. Leave the system. Those that are left, many of them are going to sing their praises. We're not hearing from the kids that left. We're not hearing from those other groups of kids. That's what we need to continue to hear from. We need to hear from those people that left, teachers, administrators, counselors, kids. That's going to give us the full story, not just a story by those within the system to say we're doing great work.
Thanks. I wanted to ask about the national policies, the No Child Left Behind, which is still in place, although everyone seems to agree that it's not a good law. And also the states that are requesting waivers from No Child Left Behind because the requirements to succeed now are basically impossible, 100% of all children passing all the tests, or else your school is a failure. And Texas is asking for a waiver, but part of the deal with the devil, I guess, is that Arne Duncan and the Obama administration are asking for teachers to be graded based on the test scores of their kids in the classroom. So can you comment on that, and also maybe on just No Child Left Behind and why the Obama administration is not getting the message?
This is probably the most confounding aspect within this administration, this current administration, that we deal with. Your initial question was about NCLB and waivers. NCLB is an awful, awful piece of legislation. It is destroying, as I spoke earlier, our public education system. The waiver system is an awful, awful waiver because you're just trading one devil for another. It's just what do you want to deal with? And so, you can flip the coin. What we have to do is change the law. not to adhere to a test and connect test scores to how I'm going to pay you. Because I guarantee you how my kids do on that test, I have some influence on. But I am not the influence of how that kid performs that day. I taught too long to know that. Arnie Duncan didn't teach. Arnie Duncan has a program and a model that he instituted in Chicago that was solely based on test scores, closing schools, moving bad teachers, and getting his programs in and opening up for charters. So why is the Obama administration doing this? Arnie Duncan. President Obama is listening to Arnie Duncan, and Arnie Duncan is not education's friend. That has to change. And until that changes, we're not going to see any relief. They have no interest in changing NCLB. They're just letting it drag along. They're not trying to make it. They're just adding another. They say, okay, well, that's over there. We all hate NCLB, and they'll talk smack about NCLB. But then they offer up this other thing that you walk over here, they're going to smack you with that. And it's not right. They're not talking to teachers. In the first week or two of the Obama administration, the words bad teachers came out of the education department. Within months of being elected, a New Jersey district, every teacher was fired, was let go. And the Obama administration said, well, we have to have standards. They didn't care. They didn't understand. They don't know. And so what has to change? The way I see it, I see NCLB as a piece of legislation to destroy public education. And at the end of the day, to charterize public education and to ultimately say, even though they say they want 100%, they don't want 100%. They're willing to give up a certain group of kids and sacrifice a certain group of kids for the majority and to let them succeed. And who's in the majority? With the kids that already are coming out of opportunities that are more powerful. So we have to change NCLB, and we have to change this notion that these waivers are a godsend.
In my work, I deal on an almost daily basis with engineers from other countries. And so I have some familiarity with other ways of doing the teaching systems in various places around the world. Does your organization ever look at best practices in terms of both teaching and in terms of organizational practices in the type of work you do from other countries?
There's a lot of talk educationally in this country around other systems. And every 3 or 4 years, there seems to be a new best country. It could be South Korea. It could be Singapore. Finland seems to be the country du jour today. I guess I was just repetitive. We look at all these practices and see what's different. But what we have to be careful of when we start looking at other systems is not just their outcomes and their successes. So this is why we get there. Yes, the Finland system is completely unionized. So the argument against union is a false argument. I think what's important is to look at, because there's differences. Our system is so heterogeneous. We take everybody. Everybody. We will go out and drag you in a police car to school. You have to learn. Now, one could argue the merits of that or not, but we insist that everybody should have an education. And I think that is one of the finest values that this country holds. We have to be careful when we start comparing ourselves that we compare fairly. I think there are lots of opportunities in other countries. Our union has worked in the Singaporean system of how pay is distributed. And rather than looking at so many steps, looking at large lanes and large opportunities. So it's more dynamic. It gives opportunities for teachers. Because your pay schedule now, like in Austin, has 41 or 42 steps in it with 2 or 3 lanes. They don't amount. A 10-year teacher makes $900 more in AISD than a beginning teacher. It's appalling. It's just appalling. And so we've got to look at different systems and see what would work. And we need to be innovative. And innovative looks at some best practices, will look at research, but sometimes it's really stepping out and taking a risk and trying something different. And the Travis Heights School that I spoke to, Travis Heights Elementary, where we came together with the parents and teachers, worked for 3 years to develop this school that's a neighborhood school. Everybody gets in, respects teacher contracts, no skimming and trimming, nothing. It just allows teachers the opportunity to actually do the type of project-based service learning, which is social learning, which is community-based learning, technology and dual language, the things that they value, they get to do. And we'll see how successful it is. It's based out of best practices, but we'll see how successful it is. So we're trying to do those things as far as pay, as far as appraisals, as far as many things.
Ken, thank you for coming today.
You're welcome.
I really want to hear you say what other schools in Texas are doing something, what other schools in the U.S. are doing something like you're remarking about, and are we telling President Obama how big the injury, how many $1 billion is it actually costing us to have the teacher taken out of the classroom with the test and creating suicide?
Well, Ken, this is part of our struggle, right? We have it here locally, where we're telling our administration in the district the struggles and the problems and the frustrations that we're facing, that this is wrong-headed, that we can't be cutting as they did 3 years ago, 1,100 teachers, only to hire back over 2,000 over the next 2 years. This is not right. Okay? Getting them to hear that is one thing. Getting them to act on it in the way we want them to act on it is another thing. And yes, to answer your question, all the way up the line, from our local to our state to our legislature and our representatives, all the way up to the national level, with the AFT and the NEA, which are our parent organizations, standing up and telling that administration, speaking with Arnie Duncan, telling them that this is wrong, it's not going to work. They're not listening. They're not listening. But that doesn't mean we don't keep fighting. And we'll continue to do it, Ken, because we're going to see a better day. I guarantee it.
I'm not an educated man. I can't pretend to know what will fix the education problems. But I believe that the struggles of the working class people are taken to school with their children. The stresses of whether you're going to be able to pay the rent, if you're going to be out in the street, if you're going to have clothes to go to school. Every economic and social aspect of being a worker that is exploited to the lowest point of money that they will take is carried to school with the children. And why should we support other unions other than ourselves? Because if we can bring these folks up, I believe that it will help education. If these kids can have, know if they get sick or if their parents get sick, that everything's going to be all right. We don't have this kind of security in the working class anymore, and I think it affects education. I would think that you would agree. I guess it's more of a statement than a question because I just don't know what to ask at this point.
Brother Mike, I absolutely, I'm not going to add to that because that's exactly right. It's the whole social fabric of this country. We have to have, I had folks come to me during the session and ask in the media saying, what do you think about them taking money from education and putting it into roads? Well, me, I don't like that because I'm a teacher. I'm a union leader. But the roads people believe it's very, very important, and it's their value. And what that does, that question tries to divide the deeper issue. Because when you're dealing with health and roads and which is infrastructure and schools, they're all together. You got to have healthy kids to get on a bus to drive down the road to go to a school so they can succeed. They all work together. And the question should be, when are we going to support all of those, and not just with a drop in the bucket like the roads dollars were? When do we, dare I say, find more resources at the end of the day, is taxes. I don't care how you cut it, we got to have more money coming in. And it's the only way we will fix the ills that we're talking about. We cannot cut our way to success. And so it's everything together, Mike.
I'm interested in finding a group of several hundred people that would be interested in interchanging occupations. That would be several hundred occupations, several hundred people would interchange, modeled on a computer that would facilitate this. And I'm wondering if I can talk to you about maybe finding a group of people that could do this.
Well, I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards. I think one of our challenges always as an organization as at Austin is our access. We don't have unfettered access through our district. They limit that a great deal. And mobilizing can be a challenge. I think that those of us who do a lot of mobilizing, have been in mobilizing, it's always a big lift because you have teachers that are working 60 hours. But I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards at more length. You know, Education Austin formed out of a battle. Education Austin, 15 years ago, there were 2 locals and then a support staff, classified staff, unions working in the district. And they just kept battling. There was just conflict. And so the idea was, what if we came together and worked together on these issues? We have common cause. I mean, we all have the same concerns. We are just institutionally butting our heads, which did nothing but help administration downtown be more successful while labor just fussed. And so what we did is we merged. We merged into Education Austin. And it has been extraordinarily powerful to have the kind of impact on an election, to be able to get a powerful charter kicked out of the district, to be able to get local organizations to work together, to reach out. I think the people that set that in motion, and Eric Hartman is one of them, from way back in those days, really were visionary in seeing what we as a labor movement needed to do. And it has to reach out beyond just teachers' unions. It has to reach out to unions and organizations and communities so that we are holding our elected officials accountable and the administrations accountable for what is important to our communities. So I challenge you to reach out to organizations, talk to people, find out what you can do. Check on Facebook, let us know, and we'll be happy to help you. Thank you.
Thank you. Very powerful presentation.